Hello and welcome to EGX Digital 2020. My name is No-Limit-Cosplay and today I'm here to speak to you about budgeting in cosplay. So before I get started on that, I'll just do a bit of a quick introduction. So I'm No-Limit-Cosplay. I've been cosplaying for almost a decade now, and I do cosplays from a whole range of different series and genres as well. When I'm not cosplaying, you can see me doing games or working hard. That's pretty much my introduction there. So that's all out of the way. We can get started on the main thing. So a lot of you probably sat there thinking, how expensive is cosplay as a hobby? The answer to that is very. Cosplay is a very expensive hobby, and there's no way of me trying to hide that from you or denying that fact. There's a lot of things that you have to consider expenses on when it comes to a cosplay, which I'll get onto in a minute. But there are ways that we can make cosplay a bit cheaper and nicer on your bank account. So that's what I'm going to try and do today, is cover those points so you can have a few ideas as to how to make things a lot cheaper and not look as bad when trying to explain to people where all your money has gone. Obviously, these points in this video are not all the only ways of doing it. There are other ways that you can save money, and there's probably other hints and tips that people are going to be screaming at me for in this video for not mentioning, but these are just the ones that I tend to use when working on cosplay, working on things, just so that I save a bit of money here and there and don't have to explain to anyone where all my money has gone. So there's different pieces obviously that you need to consider when actually doing cosplay. The expenses for cosplay are not just the cosplay itself, and obviously a cosplay has all its different expenses, which we'll also get onto, but there's also the thing to take into account, such as the event tickets if you go to conventions and different events, the actual hotels and travel expenses for these events that you're going to. Obviously, there's also food, drinks, and anything that you want to buy when you're at the events as well. It's all well and good turning up to the event, but then if you don't have any money to sort of live on and enjoy yourself on, it's not going to be very enjoyable, especially when you see something on the stall that you really want to buy. So there's all these different pieces that you need to consider. Obviously, the cosplay being the main part, and then all the events being extra add-ons. So we'll start off with the cosplay section, because that's the main point of the video and the whole theme of the video. So cosplay is obviously made of different pieces. You've got the actual costume itself, the wigs if you need wigs, any contact lenses or makeup if you need any of those as well, and then also additional items like props, like items to carry, and wings and accessories as well. So you've got all these different pieces that you need to consider. Now obviously the main piece that we'll work on first is the costumes themselves. So sometimes people turn around and say it's easier or cheaper to make the cosplay, as it will save you money, and that is sometimes true and sometimes false. So with cosplay, obviously you can make your own cosplay, you can buy your own cosplay, you can borrow a cosplay if you don't want to have it permanently. But when it comes to the buy-in and making argument, there is a lot of things that you can consider with cost as well. And this could help you make your decision as to if you're going to buy something or make something, especially if you're looking to be on a budget. So making a cosplay can be really, really cheap if you already have pieces in. So obviously if you're making a cosplay, you've got to consider the materials that you're going to need, so the fabrics, any buttons or accessories that you're going to need to put on the actual outfit, any thread as well. Obviously you need your thread to sew with, but you also need to consider things like your sewing equipment, so needles, all your different pieces that you're going to use for sewing, pins, sewing machine as well if you don't have one of those. All these like little pieces will add up to become a cost. So what I always end up doing if I am making a costume, I'll make a list of how many pieces I'll need, and then go online and do a bit of cost checking as well, sort of see how much things roughly cost. And then you can also, if you have a market store near you where you get your fabrics from and your little bits from, you can go to the market stores and ask them as well and see how much they can quote you for the fabrics. And then you have this list of prices by the end of it, and you can add it all up and then figure out just how much that handmade costume is going to cost without time added on. And then, so what you've got there then is your breakdown of your costs to just make the outfit piece. But what you can also do is go online and double check the pre-made cosplays. If you're not too fussed about it being bought or made, you can check on the online websites such as Costumes is one that I know I use quite a bit, and you can check on there and see how much they're selling their costumes for. Sometimes you'll find that the costume you've scheduled to make is actually a lot cheaper to buy online. Some people will turn around and there's a bit of an argument as to whether you should buy and should make, but if you are someone who's not too fussed about buying or making and they are on a budget, it sometimes is cheaper to buy it online. There are obviously some websites which do make it even cheaper to buy cosplay on. So you've got some websites that are just dedicated to selling cosplay and they tend to have the higher prices. But then if you go onto websites like eBay, you can sometimes find cosplay a lot cheaper on there. The best thing as well when buying cosplay online is to shop around. Obviously, it's great if you open up the first website and there it is, the costume you're looking for is right in front of you. However, if you buy the first one you see, you might end up missing out on a cheaper price elsewhere. Because every single cosplay website sells their costumes at different prices, and sometimes the first one you find is the most expensive one. So always make sure you shop around when looking at cosplay, just to make sure you see just how much it is and make sure you've got the best possible price before buying it. That's the easy one. You can also get cosplay costumes cheap on Facebook and eBay again. So Facebook has obviously a big selling community on there now for buy and sell Facebook options and marketplace. So there are some groups on Facebook now dedicated to just buying and selling of cosplay, as well as other different accessories, and I think there's one for wigs and also one for merchandise as well. So if you are looking for any specific costumes and you do have a bit of a budget on you, you can always ask in these groups. The only thing that I do find with those groups is if you are trying to buy a cosplay through a cosplay sales group on Facebook, there isn't always going to be a guarantee that what you're looking for is there. You also may not be able to guarantee the size that you're looking for or the right colour variant if you're looking for something specific. But if you're willing to wait and just sort of be a bit lenient with what you're asking for, those Facebook groups tend to have pretty good options available. And unlike a usual full cosplay, they can sometimes be as cheap as £5 going upwards. I think I've seen a few on Facebook groups go for usually around a £20 to £30 mark, which is a lot cheaper than the new cosplay, which tends to retail anywhere between £25 all the way up in price. But if you keep an eye on those groups, you can sometimes find a really good deal as well. But that's basically the main stuff for the costume side. Obviously, the next thing would be wigs. Again, you can get a wig from a costume resale page pretty easily. Obviously, make sure for hygiene reasons that you do wash the wig before you wear it. I'm not going to be the person who doesn't warn you about that one. Obviously, you can get them on pre-sale groups, and you can also find cheaper wigs on places like Amazon and eBay. Obviously, the only thing that you have got to worry about when you are buying wigs is that they can sometimes be different quality to the ones that you'd buy for a higher price. Now, a lot of the times, the wigs that seem to be really cheap on those websites tend to be the sort of fancy dress grade party wigs, which are nasty to the touch to begin with. They also have like a really cheap wig cap inside of them. But the other thing as well with those is they tend to be incredibly shiny, which some people aren't too fussed by, and sometimes you actually need that for a wig, but 9 times out of 10 in cosplay, they aren't the sort of wigs that you need for the cosplays you want to do. You can always tell a party wig from a shop bought wig from a cosplay wig, and it's definitely something that you want to try and avoid if you can, getting those wigs. The wigs is probably one of those things that I'd say don't try and go too cheap on, because you will lose out on quality. One of the places that I tend to swear by for wigs is actually a company called Coscraft. It's where this one came from, along with pretty much most of my wigs at this point. They're not like, they are actually pretty good. They're amazing in quality, and they're also really good in price as well. I mean, you are paying a little bit more, but it's not that bad when you consider the quality that you're getting. Because sometimes with cosplay, you do have to go for the quality over the price, and budgeting can't always save you in that situation. But yeah, I've been pretty lucky with some eBay wigs as well. So the best thing to recommend is obviously check your reviews before you buy them, just in case the prices are too good to be true. And that's again the case with the online buying and selling of costumes as well. So the next thing for the cosplay itself would be, I think we'll go with the contact lenses next. So I'm not currently wearing any contact lenses, so ignore the whole face pointing thing there. But cosplay, a lot of people tend to like using contact lenses to make their eyes pop and show the colours that they want for their characters. This is one where I will say do not budget for any cheaper lenses. With obviously contact lenses and working with your eyes, please try and stick to the registered opticians where you can, sort of speak to your opticians and sort of get their opinion on it as well. And then if you do end up going to buy some online, I recommend going to a company like Honeycolour, just because they are certified, I believe, and also they are a very reputable company to buy lenses from. Don't go for the cheaper lenses that you see on a random website just because you think they are cheaper and it's going to make your life easier. Make sure you get obviously a decent set of lenses, because at the end of it your eyes are important, so don't go cheap on something which could potentially be dangerous. It's one of the serious things there. Don't ever risk your eyesight. Never risk your eyesight for cosplay. It's not a good idea. But yeah, that's contact lenses. The other thing for cosplay that I tend to be really cheap on is makeup. Makeup, I tend to just use a few basic budget brands, but I also have a lot of different eyeshadow palettes with, the ones with all the different colours, and that's basically how I keep to my budget with makeup. I just make sure I have 1 or 2 palettes which have enough colours that I need, and then just sort of cycle through the same few colours for each of my cosplays. 9 times out of 10 I find with makeup you just need, well, for my makeup anyway, I use a decent eyeliner, and then I have eyeshadow which does pretty much everything else, and obviously concealer. With eyeshadow palettes, I personally usually just go for one of the cheaper model eyeshadow palettes from Superdrug usually. But if you, again with makeup, if you already have makeup, you can just use that. You don't need to go out and buy any new makeup for cosplay. Cosplay makeup is just normal makeup, and then you just change it to the style to suit the character you need. So you don't need to go out and buy anything fancy or special, as long as it works with your skin and it makes you feel better about how it all looks, then it's all good. But yeah, makeup is really not my sort of area. You can probably tell. So the cosplay as well, props and accessories tend to get quite expensive. Obviously, most of the time people will hand make their props, but there's also a cheaper way of getting around some of the props if you don't have the sort of skill or confidence to make it. One of the things that I tend to do a lot of the time is I'll buy pieces from a local fancy dress shop and then just sort of repaint those and change those a little bit, just to give them a bit more of the shine to what I'm actually trying to work with. I know a lot of the time I end up buying plastic swords, the sort of child-sized plastic swords. They tend to be pretty cheap, especially if you go onto a fancy dress shop or eBay, and I mean sometimes the pound shops have them as well, so you can go and get them from those for a pretty good price and then repaint those with a few cans of spray paint and some airbrushing and stuff, and then you've got a really fancy looking sword for a lot less of the price than you would if you were trying to completely hand make it through something like foam. But again, with obviously props, making, buying, there is the argument of choosing to buy the prop or buy the parts in to make the prop, and again it's the same argument that I mentioned before with which one's cheaper. It's honestly, it's up to you when it comes to that sort of point. If you want to buy it, if you want to make it, whichever one falls in line with your budget is what works best for you. So that's basically all the section about making and buying cosplay to make the cosplay cheaper. But next piece would be the actual events themselves. So the events, obviously, every event has tickets, which is the main piece that you need to pay for when it comes to an event. It's usually your one blanket price, which gets you into everything. These tend to be pretty expensive, but there's not usually many ways to make them cheaper, unfortunately. One of the best ways to make a convention ticket cheaper is to keep an eye on the actual webpage when they are releasing the tickets and see if there's an option for an early bird. So some events, usually quite small, some of the smaller events I find tend to do this, and a lot of some of the bigger ones as well, when they've got limited amount of tickets available, is they will release an early bird ticket slot, which is a pre-release to the main ticket release, and they are usually released at a discounted price for getting in early. Obviously, the longer you leave it, those tickets will then disappear, and then the main tickets at the full price will come in. Sometimes these tickets are just like a small reduction, so a couple of pounds, but then sometimes they will be a bigger reduction, and that's obviously when you need to get in there quick on those tickets to get hold of those. Obviously, when you've got your event tickets, some events will also do discount codes as well. Especially if you've been to the events before or they are a new event, they'll have little discounts available where you can get money off your tickets and save a bit more money there. So when you've got your actual ticket for the event, you've also got to consider how are you getting to the event. So a lot of events tend to be away from home. Not very often do you have an event literally next door to you, so you can just walk out and walk to the event. So you've got to consider how you're getting there. So obviously you've got transport by car, coaches, trains, even by plane if you want, depending on where you are traveling for this event. But there's not really much that I can say to advise on the travel section when it comes to cars, but we can talk a bit more about obviously your coach travel and your train travel and plane travel. So obviously coach travel, it's one of those things like train travel and plane travel where the longer you leave it, the more expensive it will get. And obviously the earlier you book, the cheaper it will get. So the main advice whenever I'm traveling somewhere is to get in there early on the booking of everything I need. So book my train tickets early, book my plane tickets early, make sure that I've got everything booked in advance so it's all ready and it's a lot cheaper in the long run. The other thing with transport is that you want to consider getting a rail card if you are using the trains more often. The rail cards are there's no overall charge that you pay, and then it makes every other journey in that time period a lot cheaper. And by a lot cheaper, I mean you can save a lot more money than you'd expect to on these train tickets when in valid times, because the rail cards only let you use them during certain periods of time. But if you're traveling to an event, you should be usually traveling that sort of time period where it is valid. So it basically will cut a lot of money out of your train journey, which makes it a lot more comfortable. And you also usually reserve seats on those trains as well, which was an extra bonus to do. But yeah, I think the same with planes as well. If you've got any sort of loyalty schemes with transport companies and discount schemes, keep an eye on those and be sure to use those as well, just because it makes it so much easier and cheaper on you. Transport tends to be one of the more expensive pieces when you're traveling, so do anything you can in that sort of sense with these different schemes to try and bring that cost down. But the general advice for traveling is to book in advance to avoid massive price shocks later on at the time. We've also got hotels. So 9 times out of 10 you won't need a hotel unless it's an event which is really, really far away from where you're living. And when it comes to hotels, you want to pre-book your tickets again. Pre-book your room and make sure it's all registered and set up in advance. Because again, the longer you leave it, the more expensive it's going to get. The other thing with booking hotels for events is you don't want to usually book the first price you see. Some people turn around and say that their cheapest prices are on their websites, and then other people say that's their most expensive prices. What I'd recommend doing is, again, shopping around when looking at different places to sort of stay. Make sure that you've found a place that's in your budget, in the area where you're trying to stay, and actually caters to your needs. Because I know some people will try and book a cheaper hotel just because it's cheapest and not because it's actually got anything that they need in the hotel. But again, on the other end of the spectrum, don't bother wasting your time buying a really expensive hotel which is right on top of the event with amenities that you're not going to need. If you don't mind doing a walk, you can just stay a bit further away from the venue and have a morning walk or morning train ride, a car ride, an Uber, whatever you need to do. With hotel booking, I tend to use booking.com, and I use their price comparison when booking, and I use that, and I tend to find a pretty good room within about 5 minutes of searching in the price range I'm looking for. I mean, if you're like me, I just filter from cheapest to highest and then go from there. But yeah, it's always ideal to do a price comparison just to see if you are getting the best deal for your rooms. And obviously with hotel rooms, what you can do is you can split the cost between other people depending on how many people are supposed to fit in the room. So obviously if you've got a room for 2 people, the cost you're looking at is the cost for the 2 of you. So you just split that down the middle and then you've got a lot more of a reasonable price than what you're looking at. Another thing to keep an eye on would be referral schemes. I know that booking.com have got their own referral scheme where the more people who use your link, the more people will save on their own travel as well as you save on your own. So keep an eye on these loyalty schemes again that the hotel booking sites like Trivago and booking.com have, as they will be able to allocate you extra discounts and bonuses depending on how many times you use their service, when you use their service, and all the other bookings that they do on their sites as well. So keep an eye on those, and they'll make your travel and hotel stays a lot cheaper and a lot more enjoyable as well. Obviously, the other thing when it comes to events is you've got to deal with the cost of everything else. So when you get to the event and you're there and you're in your cosplay, you're at the event and it's all wonderful, you checked into your hotel, what you need to consider then is eating and drinking and surviving, as well as treating yourself to anything that you might like at the events when you're there. So food and drink obviously are your main pieces when at an event. You need to eat and drink to survive, and if you don't, then we have a bit of a problem and it gets a bit messy. So 9 times out of 10, the events have their own sort of catering in the venues, and you can usually you can figure out in advance how much these sort of vendors cost. Unfortunately, when it comes to buying food and drink at an event venue, they're not always as cheap as it is outside the event venue. So if it's a venue where there's like shops and shopping centres nearby, you may choose to go and leave the venue to go and get some food just because it's easier on the wallet. Or you can stay inside the venue and pay for the food there as well. There's not really any tips on how to make those any cheaper, unfortunately, because it is obviously ran by the events and each one's different. But what I would recommend for that is a budgeting plan, which I'll get onto in a minute. It's a bit more boring mathematical stuff, that one. But you've also got to pay attention to how much you want to spend when at the event for obviously merchandising as well. So if you're going around the event, you might see something really cool that you want to buy, but again, you've got to consider how much money you've got to spend on things at the event. So now that the rundown is done, I can go on to the boring mathematical side that I just mentioned 2 minutes ago. So when it comes to the budgeting section, I'm going to run you through a process that I tend to do when I do my costumes and my event planning. Again, it's not a solid sort of plan, it's what I do, so it may not be what everyone else does, but what I try and do is I try and get every single piece that I'm going to need to pay for and put it into a list. And in this list, I'll then be able to see just how much it should cost. Should being the key word. Now, I say it how it should cost because this obviously is all based on estimations and how the prices are at the time. Obviously, when it comes to the travel and the room bookings, you can't always guarantee that those prices that you're looking at are going to stay at those prices forever. So I'll end up making my list and sort of see at the end what the end price is. And from there, I'll be able to sort of make a judgment call as to if I am going to try and change anything to make it cheaper or how much I need to try and save. What I tend to do on top of my price for my hotel, my tickets, and my travel is I'll add on extra money as well to consider how much I'm going to try and spend. So like how much money am I going to need on food and drink, how much money am I going to need if I want to buy anything, and how much money do I need just in case. What I always try and do is, I think usually I try and stick with about £100 or £200 per day when it comes to the money to spend on food, drink, and merchandising and just in case money. Just because the amount of times where I've been caught off guard by being taken out after the event to go and get some food or something, or suddenly needing a taxi back to the room because I've left something there or something like that. So it's always good to be prepared with like a little bit of an overspill of money on that. But obviously the other thing you've got to remember is the money that you are spending, you are having this tally is all just a theory idea. It's not solid until you start booking things and start ticking things off. But as long as you have that sort of emergency backup money there just in case, you should be okay. Obviously, the most important point of the panel is obviously don't put yourself into debt because of cosplay. It sounds really stupid, but I have to say that one. The amount of times where people will make really, really, really strange financial decisions for the sake of a cosplay. You've probably seen the memes in the comics online where it's like cosplay or eating. I'm going to answer that question for you now. The answer is eating always. You never ever put yourself into a situation where you can't afford to eat because you spent money on a costume or a wig or any other part of an event. It's more important for you to be at a healthy sort of state where you're eating and drinking than being at a convention when you're unhealthy, unhappy, and generally miserable because you're trying to push yourself but you can't afford to eat. But yes, the whole idea of cosplay and budgeting, do that after you've done all your main budgeting for the rest of your working life, you know. Deal with your finances first where it comes to bills, general transport, work transport. Deal with all that before you start using any extra money for the cosplay side. It sounds like a bit of a buzzkill on that, but you will thank me in the long run when you've got a roof over your heads and one cosplay instead of 5 cosplays and a cardboard box. But yeah, make sure you only start spending money on cosplay when you've got money. Everything else is dealt with on the money side for your finances. But that is pretty much all we've got. You know, there's the only other real thing I can think of for saving money when it comes to cosplay is keep an eye on your inbox for any discount codes that could come through at any point, including for things like the cosplay and the contact lenses and the makeup and everything else. If you are on if you're one of these people who likes to buy stuff online or in shops as well, you can always get your loyalty cards. So if you get loyalty cards for different companies and different shops, you can sometimes find again that you get discounts there, and they can be used to provide parts for cosplay. And that is probably one of my go-tos as well, because I think I've got like a full wallet full of cards like that now of different loyalty schemes. But yeah, loyalty schemes can save you a lot of money in the long run. But yeah, that's pretty much all that this panel is covering. So thank you for watching and have a great day.